Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
දසන කාන්ති චූර්ණය සහිත liver ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
Tonight, leave. President Ranil Wickremesinghe tells all state workers who can't perform duties diligently to leave. Concerns from afar. As 10 US Congress members urge USAID to provide additional assistance to Sri Lanka as they express their deep concern over the disastrous economic situation here, Sri Lanka's ambassador to the US, Mahinda Samarasinghe, responds with gratitude. Scandal? The Cardinal accuses leaders of fearing their involvement in the East attacks of being revealed as a reason for their unwillingness to probe the attacks. Optimism. Minister of Tourism Harin Fernando expects the country to welcome 1 million tourists this year. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Sunday the 21st of August 2022.
Vim Dera milliliter CA Smart Pack එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9, live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News Service. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now in your top stories for tonight, President Ranil Wickremesinghe reiterated his calls to all parties to join hands in building the nation just as all were united during the period of gaining independence. Addressing the Anuradhapura District Development Committee meeting, President Wickremesinghe advised government officials to contribute to ensure efficiency and, if not, vacate their jobs.
The Anuradhapura District Development Committee, which is in charge of the development activities of the district, met this morning under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The meeting was joined by representatives of the United National Party, Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna and Sri Lanka Freedom Party.
ඉතින් කොහෙන්ද අපිට ඉස්සෙල්ලාම ආර්ථිකයේ සංවර්ධනයක් ඇති කරන්න පුළුවන්. මහා කන්නේ ගොවිතැන. අපි ගොවිතැන හරියට සාර්ථකව කරනවා නම් ආපහු අඩුනේ ආර්ථිකය, ඇකුලනේ ආර්ථික ආපහු තල්ලු කරන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙනම් අපි බලන්නේ ආණ්ඩුවක් හැටියට මහා කන්නේට යොදවලා වැඩ කටයුතු කරන්න. ගම් මට්ටමේ මං හිතන්නේ බිම් මට්ටමේ ඉන්න නිලධාරී ශාලේකම්තෝ තුන් දෙනෙක් අපිට ඉන්නවා ග්‍රාම නිලධාරී ඉන්නවා වෙන කවුද ඉන්නේ? 9ක් ඉන්නවා. ඒගොල්ලෝ ගොවිතැන් කරත ඇතිනේ. තව මොකක්වත් වුමනා නැහැ. අපි ඒ අයට මේ තමන්ගේ ග්‍රාම නිලධාරී කොට්ටාසේ බෙදලා හැම එක්කෙනාම කොටසක් වාර්තා කරන්න කියලා. වැඩ කරනවා නම් වැඩ කරන්න, බැරි නම් ගෙදර යන්න. අපි නිකන් ගෙවන්න ලෑස්ති. ඒක දිසාලේකම්තුමාට බලා ගන්න වෙයි ප්‍රාදේශීය ලේකම්වරු එක්ක. මොකද මෙතන කාටවත් නිකන් කන්න බෑ. මොහක් හරි කරන්න ඕනේ. මොකද අපි ගෙවන්නේ. මටත් නිකන් කන්න බෑ. මොහක් හරි කරන්න ඕනේ. මම මේක දිනු කරේ නැත්තම් මටත් යන්න වෙනවා. එහෙනම් ඉස්සෙල්ලා ගමෙන් පටන් ගමු. ඉතින් අපි එකතු වෙලා කරමු. ඉතින් මෙතන ඉන්නේ පක්ෂ තුනකට සහයෝගය දුන්නේ අය. එක්සත් ජාතික පක්ෂයටයි, පොහොට්ටුවටයි, ශ්‍රී ලංකා නිදහස් පක්ෂයට. ඒත් මම මේක ඔයගොල්ලෝ සීමා කරන්නේ අනික් පක්ෂ වලටත් එන්න කියන්නේ. සජවයටත් එන්න කියන්නේ. ජනතා විමුක්ති පෙරමුණටත් එන්න කියන්නේ. ඒ නිසා මම බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන සැරේ එනකොට මම ඔක්කොම පක්ෂ එක්ක කතා කරනවා. මම කැමතියි හැම එක්කෙනාම එකට එකතු වෙන්න. ඒත් මම එකක් කියන්න කැමතියි අනුරාධපුරේ පොඩි ඉතිහාසයක්. අද අපිට බලපාන එකක්. බ්‍රිතාන්‍ය යුගයෙන් පස්සේ අනුරාධපුර සුද්ධ නගරයේ වෙන් කළා නව නගරයක් හදන්න තීරණය කරේ ඩී.එස්. සෙන්නායක මැතිතුමා අගමැති හැටියට. ඒක අපිට සම්බන්ධයි. ඒ වැඩ කටයුත්ත බාර දීලා තිබුණේ සොලමන් වෙස් රිජ්වේ ඩයස් බණ්ඩාරනායක ඇමතුමාට. ඒක ඔයගොල්ලෝට සම්බන්ධයි. මේ පක්ෂය හදන්න ආවා ඩී.එස්. සෙන්නායක මැතිතුමාගේ නම නායකයාට යෝජනා කරේ එස්.ඩබ්ලිව්.ආර්.ඩී. බණ්ඩාරනායක මැතිතුමා. තව മന്ത്രിවරයෙක් ඇවිල්ලා මේ පක්ෂය හදන්න උදව් කරා. ඩී.ඒ. රාජපක්ෂ මැතිතුමා. ඉතින් ඒකත් ඔයගොල්ලෝට අයිති. හරිද? එක්සත් ජාතික පක්ෂය උල්පතෙන් තමයි මේ ඔක්කොම ආවේ. මම කියන්නේ උල්පතට ආපහු එන්න කියලා. ඒත් ඒකෙන් ආවේ සියලු දෙනාම සජබේ ඔක්කොම එකට එකතු වෙලා රට ගොඩ ගන්න. මොකද රටේ නිදහස ලබා ගන්න ඔක්කොම එකට වැඩ කරා. නිදහස ලැබුවෙන් පස්සේ තමයි වෙන්ුනේ.
Now 10 members of the United States Congress urged the United States Agency for International Development to take immediate action to provide additional relief to the Sri Lankan people, including increased food, medical and fuel aid. expressing their concern over the unprecedented and disastrous economic crisis faced by the country. In a letter addressed to the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and USAID Samantha Power, the 10 congressmen called on the State Department and USAID to take additional swift action to provide meaningful support to the Sri Lankan people in this time of need. 10 members of the governing body of the United States urged the US State Department and the US Agency for International Development to take additional swift action to provide meaningful support to the Sri Lankan people in this time of need. The US congressman had made this appeal through a letter addressed to US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and USAID Administrator Samantha Power. In their letter, they expressed deep concern over the unprecedented and disastrous economic crisis in Sri Lanka. In the appeal made by the congressman to provide meaningful support for Sri Lanka, they called on the administration to fully incorporate measures supporting the stabilization of Sri Lanka, such as advancing efforts to address long-standing issues related to accountability and reconciliation and improving democratic institutions in Sri Lanka to meet broader foreign policy goals for the region. Nevertheless, they welcome the efforts taken by the State Department and USAID to address the urgent needs of the people of Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the congressman stated that following the appointment of Ranil Wickremesinghe as a president by former head of state Gotabaya Rajapaksa, President Wickremesinghe had announced a state of emergency, placed the nation under curfew, denounced the protests that had been carried out over the past months against the economic crisis, had even suggested the use of live ammunition in quelling them. They urged the State Department to continue to use all diplomatic means available to ensure the Sri Lankan government protects the rights of suffering citizens to peacefully protest and does not utilize violence against peaceful demonstrators and journalists. Further, they stated that President Wickremesinghe's efforts to appease the protests that continued to call for large-scale reforms to the Sri Lankan political structures by removing the requirements to use His Excellency when addressing the President and the abolishment of the presidential flag has done little to assuage the concerns of the people. With this being the case, they urged the administration to continue to support the Sri Lankan government and people as they work to implement democratic and economic reforms. Now, in the meantime, in response to the concerns raised by 10 members of the US Congress, Sri Lankan Ambassador to the United States Mahinda Samarasinghe expressed his gratitude towards their interest in the country and the welfare of the Sri Lankan people. In a letter addressed to Diana Titus, member of the Congress, US Ambassador Mahinda Samarasinghe expressed his heartfelt gratitude towards the colleagues who raised concern for Sri Lanka. He said Sri Lanka is in particular grateful for several initiatives the United States is taking to guarantee food security through agencies such as the USAID, the donation of COVID-19 vaccinations, the efforts of US-based charitable foundations in supplying essential medicines, other material aid, and also intangible assistance like the support for arrangements with the International Monetary Fund. Further, the Sri Lankan ambassador said that Sri Lanka looks forward to welcoming Ambassador Samantha Power to Sri Lanka when she makes a short visit next month. He said that he hopes to work closely with the USAID in delivering relief to the Sri Lankan people in numerous spheres of activity. Ambassador Samarasinghe added that he hoped to build on the strong foundations of long-standing mutual friendship. Now, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit accuses Sri Lankan leaders of having a hand in the Easter Sunday terror attacks on the 21st of April 2019, as they have demonstrated unwillingness to investigate the attacks and reveal the truth. The Archbishop of Colombo further said that while it is the people who encourage theft, fraud and corruption, the very people of the country who call for a system change must remember that their demands should not merely be limited to slogans, but rather be put into action.
The blessings of the sick, conducted annually by the Archdiocese of Colombo at the Thevatta Church Basilica of Our Lady in Ragama, was held today.
අද අගෝස්තු 21 අද හරියටම මාස 40ක් ඉවර වෙනවා පාස්කු ප්‍රහාරයට. කෝ ඒකේ යුක්තිය, කෝ ඒකේ සත්‍යය මොකක්ද අපිට ලැබුණේ? මුකුත් නැහැ. 272 දෙනෙකුගේ ජීවිත විසි කරලා විනාශ කරලා දැම්මා. ඇයි මේ නායකයෝ මේක විග්‍රහ කරන්නට, විමර්ශනය කරන්නට අකමැති? මොනවා හරි රහසක් තියෙන්න එපා. එයාලා ඒවට සම්බන්ධ නැත්තම් ඇයි බය? මේක විමර්ශනය කරන්න දෙන්න. මේක විමර්ශනය කරන්නේ නැත්තේ ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ සහභාගීත්වයක් ඒ තුල තියෙනවා කියලා එළිදරව් වෙන නිසාද? තට්ටු මාරු ක්‍රමයට හොරකම, දූෂණය, වංචාව අපි මේවා අනුමත කළා රටක් වශයෙන්. මේකට අපි ඔක්කොම වග කියන්න ඕනේ. මේ මිනිස්සු බලයට ආවේ අපේ ඡන්දෙන් කියලා අපි මතක තියාගන්නට ඕනේ. මේ ක්‍රමවේදය, මේ දේශපාලන නායකත්වය වෙනස් කරන්නට අවශ්‍යයි. සිස්ටම් චේන්ජ් කියන්නේ නිකම් බොරුවට ස්ලෝගන් එකක් නෙමෙයි. ක්‍රියාවට නංවන්නට ඕනේ. අපේ සමාජය වෙනස් වෙන්නට ඕනේ.
Now, parliamentarian of the Jatika Janabalavegia, Vijitha Herath, says political stability can be achieved only after the establishment of a new parliament in an election. However, Samgi Janabalavegia MP Dr. Rajitha Senaratne says this is not an appropriate time for an election.
Go home කිව්වා. දැන් ඔන්න පටන් අරන් තියනවා අලුත් වැඩසටහනක්. go come home. ආපහු ගෙදර එන්න කියලා. ආපහු ආවට කමක් නැහැ. ඒක ඔහුගේ අයිතියක්. මේ රටේ පුරවැසියෙක් හැටියට. නමුත් හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න මේ ක්‍රියාත්මක වෙන්නේ අමුතුම මාදිලියේ කුමන්ත්‍රණයක්. පොහොට්ටුව නන්ලයිස්තුවක් කරලාලු ඇමතිවරු පත් කරලා. මොනවටද? රට ගොඩ නගන්න නෙවෙයි. බංකොලොත් වෙච්ච අපේ රටේ බංකොලොත් භාවය තවත් වැඩි කරන්න.
ජනාධිපතිවරයාට පුළුවන් ලබන පෙබරවාරි වලින් පස්සේ මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසිරුවා හරි. ඒ වගේම හෙට වුණත් පුළුවන් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ යෝජනාවක් සම්මත වුණොත් මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසිරුවා හරි. අද රටේ ජනතාව ඉල්ලා සිටින්නේ ජනවරමකට ඉඩ දෙන්න කියලා. එහෙම ජනවරමකට ඉඩ දීලා ඡන්දකින් අලුත් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවක් හැදීමෙන් පමණයි දේශපාලන ස්ථාවරත්වය හදන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ.
මේ වෙලාවේ මහමැතිවරණයක් කතා කරන්න ගියොත් අපේ මිනිස්සු අපිට ගල් ගහයි. මහමැතිවරණ තියන සල්ලි තියෙනවා නම් අපිට ඒවෙන් කන්න දීපියව කියලා කියයි. දැන් විපක්ෂයේ ඉන්න ගොක් පක්ෂ මේ රජයට පොඩ්ඩක් හුස්ම ගන්න ඉඩ දීලා තියෙන අලුත් ජනාධිපතිට. එහෙම හුස්ම ගන්න ඉඩ නැතුව පාරට බහින එක වැරදි. මේ තියෙන ක්‍රමයේ වෙනසක් අවශ්‍යයි. ඒ නිසා මේ ක්‍රමය වෙනස් කරන පාලනයක් මේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා තුලින් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම වුණොත් අපි ඔක්කොටම අත ගහත හැකි මල් වට්ටියට.
මම පැහැදිලිවම කියන කාර්යය තමයි සජිත් ප්‍රේමදාස මැතිතුමා ඇතුළු කණ්ඩායම දැන් වැඩපිළිවෙලකට එන්න ඕනේ. ඒ වගේම අපි අතිගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමා ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා මෙය තව දුරටත් කල්යව යවා ඉන්නේ නැතුව එන කණ්ඩායම් එක්ක එකතු වෙලා ඉදිරියට කරන්න තියෙන වැඩපිළිවෙල ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න කියලා.
අද දෙමළ ඩයස්පෝරාව පැහැදිලිව කියනවා මේ අරගලය සඳහා උන් සල්ලි දුන්නයි කියලා. ඒ වගේම සෞදි වලින් කටාර් වලින් අරගලය සඳහා මුදල් ලැබුණයි කියලා පැහැදිලිව කියනවා. අරගලයේ අයිතිකාරයෝ වෙච්ච, ලයිසන් අයිතිකාරයෝ වෙච්ච චණ්ඩීන් හිටියා. අද එකෙක් කටාර්ලා කියන්නේ නැහැ. එහෙම කවුරුත් දුන්නේ නැහැ කියලා. දැන් අපි දැක්ක අනුර දිසානායක මහත්තයා කිව්වා අපේ සමාජවාදී කලා සංගමේ තමයි අරගලයේ ඉදිරියෙන් ඉන්නේ. අපේ කාන්තා සංගමේ තමයි අරගලේ ඉන්නේ මුළු මහත් අරගලේම අපේ කිව්වා. පෙරටුගාමීන් කිව්වා අපි තමයි අරගලේ පෙරටුගාමී භූමිකාව කියලා. එහෙනම් ඔවුන් මොකද මේ චෝදනාව පිළිබඳ කියන්නේ? අපි දන්නවා නීතිඥ සංගමයට USAID එකෙන් සල්ලි හම්බෙලා තියෙනවා, NED එකෙන් සල්ලි හම්බෙලා තියෙනවා. අද වෙනකල් නීතිඥ සංගමයේ මේ ගැන වචනයක්වත් කියලා නැහැ. මේ සියල්ල පිළිබඳව ජනාධිපති විමර්ශන කොමිෂන් සභාවක් පත් කළ යුතුයි කියලා අපි යෝජනා කරනවා.
Stay with us for more news after this short break.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, stability, transparency and speed in government action is what Sri Lanka needs to attract more investors. These were the remarks of Chairman of the Petroleum Development Authority, Salia Wickramasurya, when he spoke to Indivari Amuwatha on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24. Wickramasurya believes that the economic crisis took a toll on the overall outlook of the country in the eyes of the investors due to reduced ratings and confidence expressed by international agencies. Nevertheless, he believes that the country can regain investor confidence by merely having the right attitude towards ensuring stable, transparent policies and laws.
Going forward, what is the outlook for investments in the country?
Positive from a longer term perspective than it would have been perhaps before the economic crisis started to bite, because what the economic crisis did was reduce country rating and increase country risk, and that's a perception that many people use to defer investment decisions. But those of us who recognize Sri Lanka's long-term strategic location and trade positioning, see it as a very good destination even now for the longer term. Nothing's going to change where we are and what we do.
But in the short term, what do we do in order to achieve those longer term expectations and whatever we can possibly reap in the longer term?
So certain things have already started to happen. De-restricting of foreign currency regulations or lifting of some of them is a good sign, because investors then feel a little bit more comfortable with moving money into Sri Lanka. We have to distinguish here between investment and revenue. The two are different. Investment is much longer term and revenue is immediate. But if you relax investment rules, then money that comes in forms part of our gross national reserves and is liquidity. So we can then use it for other purposes in the short term. And that's my understanding of it. In terms of policy, we already have an opportunity in the port city, because the port city, it's an offshore, shall we say, environment. And it does bring certain benefits of being an offshore environment to Sri Lanka. And being where it is, in the heart of Colombo, right next to the 22nd largest container port in the world, we think that there's a lot of potential that can be harnessed by the trade that anyway flows around by it.
Port city, is it really going to happen, especially because we've been talking about threat to Sri Lanka's economic sovereignty?
I'll take sovereignty question first. There isn't one, because the property belongs entirely on a freehold basis to the government of Sri Lanka. There's no residual obligation to any party. The developer, the master developer that invested the money in the reclamation, they will monetize their investment over a period of time, either by selling the leasehold rights of certain plots that have been allocated to them, or developing them themselves. So from that standpoint, there is no sovereignty issue, because we own it, we set the rules. So that's what the Economic Commission is. It is the government, the extension of government, that sets the regulations that regulate activities in the port city. And that's where there's slight difference between onshore regulations and offshore regulations.
How can the Hambantota port actually be used to live its potential when it was built back then? In terms of being a maritime global hub, we're far from that. Where have we missed the opportunity here?
So yes and no, because when Hambantota port was built, it was built to take a surplus of activity that was overflowing from the Colombo port. Primarily project cargo, break bulk, liquid bulk, and roll on, roll off. Now in the last few years, I believe Hambantota has become the region's hub for vehicle transshipment. That's something that Colombo port has no space for. It has worked in some aspects, but I think the other expectation was that it would function as a regional gateway for import-export businesses around the Hambantota district. So there was this vision of a large economic zone, which certainly would benefit from having a port close by. Those aspirations have yet to be achieved.
From enabling investments and to creating a conducive environment here, what more do we need to do, especially when we consider outside investments, whether it's India, the US, Japan, or China? And just as we speak about investments, they are our largest creditors as well, while we have conversations, talks with the IMF for a bailout package. So how do we manage our economic interests here?
I'll break down what an investor wants into three: stability, transparency, and speed of government action. Now, if they have access to the right people who make decisions quickly and they are confident that policy won't change from one government to the next, that's the biggest thing we can do to enhance confidence of investors. Everything else is secondary. Tax incentives are secondary. What really Sri Lanka needs to do is make it very clear that the laws and rules and regulations of today will not change. They are transparent. Projects are entertained transparently, evaluated transparently, and the decisions communicated clearly and quickly. It doesn't take much to do that. It just takes an attitude.
Now, police spokesperson SSP Nihal Talduwa says the questioning of Inter-University Students Federation convener Vasantha Mudalige and 2 others will be handed over to the Criminal Investigation Department on the instructions of the IGP C.D. Wickramaratne. Meanwhile, the police intend to request the Ministry of Defence to extend the detention order on Vasantha Mudalige and 2 others who are currently in custody. The 3 individuals were placed under arrest on the 18th of August following protests in Colombo. Later, the Defence Ministry granted permission to detain them for 90 days and be questioned. Police stated that IUSF convener Vasantha Mudalige was arrested over a pending arrest warrant against him. Now, the Sri Lanka Navy seized about 2,030 litres of petrol made ready to be transported by illegal means during a special operation carried out in Sengamulavatta area in Kalpitiya last evening. 3 suspects and 2 lorries were also taken into custody along with the fuel seized. The apprehended suspects were identified as residents of Kalpitiya, Varyapola and Ratnapura, who are from the ages of 28 to 48 years. The market value of the stock of seized petrol has been estimated over Rs 900,000. The suspects, along with petrol and the vehicles used for the illegal act, were handed over to the Kalpitiya police and onward for legal action. Welcome back. Now, Tourism Minister Harin Fernando says Sri Lanka aims to attract at least 1 million tourists by the end of this year, mostly from India. Speaking in India, the Tourism Minister Sri Lanka said that Sri Lanka hopes to earn up to $2 billion from tourism this year.
Minister of Tourism and Lands Harin Fernando, who is currently on a visit to India to promote Sri Lankan tourism, said as the situation returns to normalcy after the recent political crisis in the island, the government hopes to receive at least 1 million tourists this year, mostly from India. Press Trust of India, quoting Harin Fernandez, said the country has so far earned $900 million from the tourism sector and hopes to reach about $2 billion in tourism earnings by the end of the year. The tourism minister said tourism has once again started to pick and currently Sri Lanka receives close to 2,000 tourists a day. He said they are trying to bring in a large crowd of about 2,000 pilgrims to Jaffna Airport. Meanwhile, speaking at an event in Ahmedabad yesterday, the minister assured Indians to visit Sri Lanka without any hesitation.
We have a stable government, we have fuel, we have food, we have a very good structure of bars where entertainment is concerned. If we are the pearl, India is right above us looking at us. So India will protect us, and India and Sri Lanka should always work together and build together. We want to see Sri Lanka positioning ourselves into one of the best destinations that the world can offer. But we are offering Sri Lanka first to India. And right now, and over the years, it has been UK and India competing with each other for the first #1 spot. But I want to see, first let India see us, and then let the other world see us. Sri Lanka is a small miracle. Sri Lanka is just unbelievably, I would say, that has everything for everyone in one country.
Now, Secretary General of the Joint Apparel Association Forum, Johan Lawrence, says Sri Lanka should focus on free trade agreements with the country's biggest markets, such as the European Union and the UK, as well as India and China. Addressing a workshop themed De-risking Sri Lankan apparel, Lawrence added that Asian countries such as Vietnam and India interacting with the EU via FTAs can be disadvantageous to Sri Lanka once the GSP Plus scheme granted to the country comes to an end.
A workshop titled De-risking Sri Lankan apparel to address the new triple threat of domestic economic turmoil, global supply chain disruptions and new environmental, social or governance regulations was held in Colombo recently.
One of the things that we are seeing is a continued shift of global trade energy, and we're seeing that particularly in the EU. The EU is now looking at things like its EU-Asia connectivity strategy, which is focused directly on developing trade with Asia as a result of the trade shifts that are happening right now. And that EU-Asia connectivity strategy is based on sustainable, comprehensive, rules-based connectivity, ensuring prosperity, safety, resilience of people and so on. And all of this plays very strongly into Sri Lanka's hand because the role of sustainability in all of this is becoming key. Sri Lanka stands at a point where we could really leverage on what we've done up to now. We have an excellent track record in terms of delivering product into customers during the difficult times of the economic crisis. Our numbers for June and July are both exceedingly high, indicating that despite the issues that the country has faced, Sri Lanka has continued to keep its apparel going out to its customers. And so we sit at a point where there are some opportunities that we can go against, but as is always the case in life, there are certain things we need to be very conscious of that could take that opportunity right away from us. Vietnam, for example, has already signed its FTA with the EU. There is renewed focus on the India-EU FTA, and all of these are going to disadvantage Sri Lanka at a time when we are coming to the end of the current series of GSP Plus and in new program from 2024. Once Sri Lanka makes its application, if that comes through, we will still be in the same position as we are today. So whilst Sri Lanka is looking inwardly at trying to settle its own issues, it's also important that we start the outward focus look. We need to look very specifically at how we can push for better trading agreements with the biggest markets, certainly the EU and the UK, but also in terms of China, in terms of India, to look at opportunities to be able to give Sri Lanka a bit of a leg up at this time. Sri Lanka is still classified as a middle-income country, but as we are all aware, the situation and the circumstances around us are really quite different. And as a result, we need to push to be getting for trade terms that are more in lines of those of a least developed country, at least as a temporary gap to be able to give us the boost that the apparel industry needs to be able to take our exports to the next level.
And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.